Good morning. What I want to do today is to give you some additional context to help you as you work through Tartuffe, your first reading assignment for the Neoclassical/Enlightenment period. So I'm going to talk with you today about three different things. I'm going to talk with you about genre, I'm going to talk with you about form, and I'm going to talk about the way the play connects to the historical period, specifically Enlightenment ideals and neoclassical themes, okay? So in terms of genre, the play is definitely a comedy. Remember that a comedy is just a work that's humorous or satirical in tone, and it has a happy resolution. Things end well for most of the characters in the play. The play is also an example of a satire. Remember that a satire is just defined as a literary work in which some human vice or folly is attacked through irony, derision, or wit. And that's definitely going on in this play, okay? So the play is a comedy because it follows that basic and accepted pattern of comedic development. At the end of the play, we have marriage, order is restored, everybody's happy. It's a satire because it really attacks religious hypocrisy, which we see all over the place and most deeply represented by Tartuffe, okay? And it does so with the idea that it can help to improve humanity's lot by pointing out this particular vice, okay? In the preface to the play, you'll notice that Molière spends a whole bunch of time explaining that, look, I'm not attacking people of faith, I'm just attacking religious hypocrisy. And he actually had to do that. It was simply a part of the historical context of the period that the church was very powerful, particularly in France. And for you to even be perceived as possibly attacking the church could cause you a lot of trouble, depending upon where you were. And he was in France where, as I said, the church was very powerful. So he spends a lot of time talking about the fact that he's not attacking religion, he's attacking religious hypocrites, okay? Despite all that explaining that he did, there were different historical moments when the play was suppressed. The only reason why the play was able to be performed at one point was because the French king said, oh, I like it, I'm going to patronize the arts, it can be performed, okay? The fact that this is a satire also has a big impact on the way that Molière draws his characters. The characters in Tartuffe are really intended to be archetypes or types, rather than realistically drawn characters that you might be accustomed to encountering in more contemporary literature. So for example, Tartuffe is the archetype of the religious hypocrite. He's way over the top, right? Orgon is your archetypal gullible fool, right? He believes anything to the point that it strains the belief of the audience, right? So these types, these archetypes, their actions aren't always realistic, but they do represent typical behavior of the personality type that each character embodies. So that's very typical of satire, okay? There are also three formal characteristics of the play that really connect it to the historical period, specifically the use of heroic couplets, the use of what are called the neoclassical unities, and the use of deus ex machina, which I'll define a little bit later, to resolve the conflict in the play. Heroic couplets were incredibly popular during this period in literary history, okay? A heroic couplet is just two rhyme lines of 10 syllables each with every second syllable accented, da-da-da-da-da. If you look at the play, there are huge stretches where that is actually how characters speak, especially in the speeches that are given by Cléante, for example, because he's very much associated with order. So that regularity, that rhyme scheme would have been very appealing to the neoclassical aesthetic, right? Which emphasized regularity and order. The second thing you'll notice in the play is that Molière observes what we call the neoclassical unities. The neoclassical unities were supposedly derived from Aristotle's aesthetic theory, but not really. It was definitely a perversion of that, let's say, okay? There are three unities in neoclassical drama. There's unity of time, action, and place. And a good mnemonic device to help you remember those is UTAP, U-T-A-P, unity, time, action, place. So let me tell you what those are. Unity of time is simply the idea that the ideal play is produced in real time, okay? There aren't any breaks in the action. If a play takes 2 hours to act, then it should only include about 2 hours worth of events, okay? So that's unity of time. There's also unity of action. Unity of action simply says that there's a single plot line rather than two or three interrelated subplots like you might find in a Shakespearean play, and that every action contributes to the plot, so you don't include anything extra. So that's unity of action. Unity of place is just the idea that the physical location of the play covers only as much physical space as the stage itself, right? So if you look at the stage directions for this play, you might notice that it says something like, this is occurring in Madame Purnell's room, for example, because the stage has to represent realistically what can happen in that amount of space, okay? So those are the unities of time, action, and place, neoclassical unities. And if you think about it, that's a very neoclassical idea, that you could take this theory of drama, right, that was supposedly derived from the Greeks, and use it as a rule, as a set of rules to come up with a play. Because remember, people during the neoclassical period loved rules, they loved order, okay? Okay, let's talk now about how the play is connected to its time period, its historical period, and its period in literary history. One of the things that was going on during the Enlightenment was that there was this deep distrust of institutional religion, which was most greatly represented at the time by the Catholic Church. When Molière originally began staging this play, he actually had Tartuffe dressed as a Catholic priest, right? He had him very closely aligned with the Catholic priesthood. So he was definitely after institutional religion, although of course, you know, that was a fine line given the possible very negative consequences of attacking the church during the day, okay? It wasn't atheistic though. Remember, if you think back to the preface where he says he believes in people of faith, but what he doesn't believe in is the way that religion is sometimes taken up by hypocrites to abuse people, okay? The other thing that's very neoclassical about the play is this belief in moderation. Cléante is probably one of the most sympathetic characters in the play, and you'll notice that throughout the play, he's always the one who's counseling moderation. Let's take the middle road. Let's not get too far out this way by rejecting religious faith, but let's not get too far out this way by being atheistic, okay? So that character, Cléante, is kind of at the center of that theme in the play. Okay. A really typical neoclassical Cléante moment in the play occurs on page 353, for example, when Orgon is all upset because he's finally realized that Tartuffe is this horrible religious hypocrite. And he says, oh, I'm completely done with faith. And Cléante is like, let's not do that. If you look on page 353, line 34, for example, when Orgon's losing it, Cléante says, there you go again, extravagant as ever. Why can you not be rational? You never manage to take the middle course, it seems, but jump instead between absurd extremes. You recognize your recent grave mistake and falling victim to a pious fake. Now, to correct that error, must you embrace an even greater error in its place? So there he's saying, no extremes. When you follow the extremes, get you into trouble. So those are neoclassical values. He's the mouthpiece for neoclassical values in the play. You can also see the Enlightenment values at work in the play, specifically in this belief in empirical data. You only believe what you're able to observe for yourself. You don't take things on authority. And that's illustrated, for example, if you look on page 354, when Orgon says, yes, strange events which these two eyes beheld, the man's ingratitude is unparalleled. So he finally kind of gets it, that Tartuffe is a bad guy once he sees him in the act. So that belief is typical of the rationalism that we associate with the Enlightenment period. Finally, the play has this deeply held belief in the importance of political stability, and we can see that occurring because of the way that the king comes in the end and makes everything okay. Order is restored, Tartuffe is kicked out, and the king kind of comes in and fixes everything. That's an example of what we call a deus ex machina, which just means God from the machine. That comes from Greek drama where, a representation of the god would be lowered down into the stage and he would fix everything. So Molière, copies that way of resolving conflict and restoring order in his play. Okay, so that's it. If you have questions, talk to me on the boards.